Hey everybody, welcome back to our online class. Hope this video lecture finds you doing well and that your week is going well so far. As I mentioned in the previous video lecture about the assignment sheet for Essay 2, dealing with Conor Knighton's book Leave Only Footprints, I mentioned to you that I would talk a little bit more about some strategies for synthesis writing should you decide to use one of those prompt options that lends itself to synthesis, and some strategies and ways that you can think about approaching this essay from an organizational perspective. So that's the purpose of this video lecture, is just to talk about synthesis in a little more detail, and then kind of walk through a short exercise of how you can think about strategizing for this particular essay. So let me share my screen with you once again. This handout is available to you in the module, so you have a chance to actually look at this while we're talking, or look at this either on your own before or after you listen to this, or follow along as you're listening, however you want to handle it. But I did make this available to you so that we could go over it. So we talk about synthesis writing and synthesis essays. We're doing it in this class because this is one of the most common types of writing that you're going to do as a college student. And this is really the most common type of writing that you're going to do as a working professional. And what I mean by that is a synthesis essay requires you to write less about your own personal thoughts, beliefs, and opinions just on their own merit, but instead requires you to take a position or have a thesis or have a point of view or a perspective, and then pull information from other sources or other places in order to support or strengthen that particular perspective, argument, point of view, whatever it is that you may be trying to express in your writing. So when we talk about synthesis writing, we're talking about the definition that I've got listed there. A synthesis is basically a written discussion which incorporates support from several differing views. And you can have synthesis essays that deal with only two sources. You can have a synthesis essay that deals with three or four or five or more sources, depending on the subject matter and what it is that you're writing about and what it is that you're trying to accomplish in that particular piece of writing. In this case, we're going to be dealing with synthesis essays, excuse me, from Conor Knighton's book, and then one other source if you decide to use that particular option. There were two prompts in the assignment sheet that lent themselves a little bit more towards synthesis writing than the third option, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But you probably are familiar with or have done some synthesis writing, maybe either here this year at Ole Miss so far, or maybe in a previous class or in high school or some other location. You probably have done some synthesis writing. And we see synthesis being done in four main areas of writing. One is an analysis paper. And this is when you are taking an idea, taking a concept or a topic, and really breaking it down into its disparate points and thoughts and chunks, and really trying to emphasize and explain and show how or why something is the way that it is. So I put an example here, a comparison between the theories or evolution of who shot JFK. So an analysis paper where you're synthesizing information about who shot JFK may talk about, for example, Lee Harvey Oswald's role in the assassination of JFK. You would look for sources, material, secondary sources, newspaper articles, interviews, police reports, all of that kind of stuff that show Oswald's role. Maybe you're looking at it from the government's role. What was the government's response or responsibility or culpability in JFK's assassination? You could look for evidence and information about the motorcade that took the route that it did in Dealey Plaza the day that he was shot. The fact that he was allowed to process through that area with the rooftop of the car open. He didn't have any protection around him. He didn't have any Secret Service protection around him. What was the government's role? And you would look for information, police reports, testimony, testimony from his aides, testimony from people who were involved in the shooting that could talk a little bit more about that. So we do a lot of synthesis when we're writing an analysis and we're pulling information from other sources. Research papers, I know you all have talked about and written about a lot that you're familiar with that type of writing. That's an excellent example of synthesis. Our fourth essay of the semester is going to be a research-based essay where I'm going to ask you to go find some information on a particular topic from different sources, and then write about what those sources are telling you about that topic. And if you've done any other type of research paper, you may not have realized it, but you were doing synthesis. You were taking information from different places and looking for information and details and stats and quotes and figures and all of this, and trying to come up with some supporting evidence for your topic or for your argument. Argument papers is certainly an example of this. I've just put an example here. Turn it in. Is that a violation of student rights? If you were synthesizing and writing an argument synthesis, you would argue that yes, turnitin.com, which is a plagiarism site in which you upload information and determine if that information has been taken from the internet or books or magazines or someone else's writing. There's other places and other programs like that, Safe Assign and some others that do the same thing, is that a violation of student rights? Because you have to share your work and you have to put your work in an electronic platform and have a machine or a computer or a database kind of mine that information, mine your writing and compare it to others. Well, if you're doing an argument synthesis, you would look for evidence, information, and details and facts and figures, etc., that either support either position. Either it is a violation of student rights or it's not a violation of student rights. And then if you're writing in a business and technical style or professional writing style, you certainly do this type of writing, synthesis writing, when you are trying to take different ideas and blend them into one particular document. So if you're writing a feasibility study about a problem or an issue that's going on for a business document, you would pull information from city leaders, from architects, from newspapers, from audio clips, all kinds of different places to explain what the problem is. If you are writing a business plan to start a business, you obviously are going to look at data and statistics and comparisons. If you wanted to open a restaurant in Oxford, well, you're going to look at the population of Oxford. You're going to look at the other restaurants that are currently here that serve the kind of food that you want to serve. You're going to look at the profit margins for restaurants in Oxford. All of these things you're going to go research and then synthesize that information, boil it down into some kind of a document that you can either present to the city to get a business permit, present to a bank to get a loan to open your business, whatever it may be. So you're doing this kind of synthesis work in a lot of different ways, and some of you have a lot of different experience with that already. You just may not have realized that you're doing synthesis. So the two prompts I've asked you to consider for this particular essay deal with synthesis. One is looking at Conor Knighton's phrase, take memories and leave footprints, and looking for evidence from the book that supports his concept of that. The second prompt asks you to look at those video clips, focus on one particular park. How does the audio and the visual medium compare with the printed medium, and what does Conor want us to know, and why do you think maybe he gave us both of those in two different mediums? And then the third one obviously is the more narrative style, where I ask you to go visit a park, go visit a rural wooded area or some element of nature here in Oxford or Lafayette County, and then write about those experiences in the style of Conor Knighton's chapter, one of his chapters. But if you're thinking about a synthesis essay, particularly if you want to do one of the first two prompts, here's some things to think about, and here's some guidelines I would recommend. I would strongly recommend think about your purpose. Think about what it is that you want to write about for that particular essay. So if you are taking prompt one and you're looking at his change of phrase, and the phrase that he really likes, which is take the memories, but leave only footprints behind. What do you think the purpose of that statement actually is? What do you think that means? Just sort of in layman's terms or in your own perspective. And then what do you think Knighton means by that? And what do you think, and why do you think he changed that and phrased it differently compared to the language that he saw actually displayed in the parks and in the places that he visited? So that helps establish your purpose. That helps establish, what it is that you're going to focus on. And then you can form your thesis around that, depending on how you feel about that, what your interpretation is about that. You can always do this last. I know several of you have commented that thesis statements are challenging for you. You can always write your thesis statement last. You can always write your thesis statement after you've done some paragraph writing and after you've done some note taking and brainstorming, just to kind of see where your ideas are coming from, what your brain is having to think about this particular prompt, and come back and write the thesis later. But you do want to think about your purpose. If you've chosen this prompt, what is it about the prompt questions, or what is it about the prompt perspective that you're going to be writing about most explicitly in your essay? I would also think about your sources and become really familiar with them. I mentioned that in the assignment sheet video lecture. If you're behind on your reading for Leave Only Footprints, or you haven't read any of it, you've got your work cut out for you, because the only way this essay is going to go well for you, no matter whichever prompt option you choose, or that you're going to be most successful with this essay, is knowing the source very well, knowing what he says about this particular park, knowing what he writes about in chapter 16, knowing what he writes about in his focus and purposes in chapter 19, or whatever chapter it is that you're thinking about, or whatever set of chapters that you're thinking about. So you want to get real familiar with that. If you're choosing prompt number 2, get familiar with a chapter, get familiar with the park that he visits, and then watch that corresponding video clip from the CBS Sunday Morning website. Get really familiar with what you're seeing there. What are you looking at? What is he showing you? What is the camera showing you? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling as you watch that? Because the more familiar you are with those two sources that you're going to use to support your essay, the smoother the writing process is going to be. So that's really important with a synthesis essay. Thirdly, you want to come up with an organizational plan. This is really relative to how you write and how you draft, and everybody does it a little bit differently. No two people draft and organize an essay the same way. I'm going to show you a strategy here in just a minute. But I think these essays go really well and much smoother and much easier for you and less frustrating if you have some kind of an organizational plan. It doesn't have to be a formal outline, doesn't have to be a grid, or doesn't have to be an Excel sheet or a chart or in Microsoft Word or something like that. It can be something that you use that's effective for you, but you want to go in with an organizational plan. One, so that you have sort of an outline or a pattern to follow, and two, so that you don't miss anything. You don't miss any key points. You don't miss any evidence from the sources that you're using to support your point. So go in with some kind of an organizational plan. You can't just sort of sit down and write this off the top of your head, maybe as easily as you would have with This I Believe narrative essay when you're writing about a personal belief that impacts you. You've got to go in with some type of a plan. You want to evaluate and interpret each source, and then think about what those sources are revealing as it connects to your purpose and your thesis. So you may get into chapter 19, for example, if you're using prompt number 2 and you realize, you know what, I just don't really have a strong connection to chapter 19. I'm going to pick when he went to this park instead because I feel like I have a stronger connection to that. I feel like I understand what he's doing there more. And I feel like I've got more to say about the evidence that he's using with my purpose from that particular chapter. So you can evaluate and interpret. You may find one of the video clips from the option number 2 from the CBS Sunday morning website just doesn't match up as well as you need it to or want it to for the chapter. And so maybe you need to get rid of one or the other or pick a different park that he visits. I don't know. You have to kind of work through that. But you want to evaluate and interpret which source is giving you the most information, that gives you the most support, but also connects with your purpose and your interest. And then you want to document each source. I would highly recommend as you're going through this process, if you choose prompt 1 or 2, make sure that you write down the quotes, the pieces of information that you're going to take from the video, if you're doing prompt 2, and the chapter, and make sure that you have that written down, you have that highlighted so that when you're drafting the essay and you're citing that information and using that information to support your purpose and your thesis, you've got it readily available. You know where to find it. You've got it highlighted or marked or dog-eared or marked with a post-it note, whatever it is, that you've got that in place there so that you're not spending time flipping through the book trying to find that information. You want to write smarter, not necessarily harder, for a synthesis essay. And this is one of the ways that you write smarter, is you don't spend a lot of time sort of looking for source information as you go. You have all this laid out and marked and notated ahead of time so that when you sit down to draft, you'll know what to do. And then here's just some strategies for organization. We do a lot of different strategies when we're writing synthesis. Sometimes we do what I call the climactic order. We arrange most important information first, and then the least important information second. You can certainly do that for any one of these 3 prompts that you have with Conor Knighton's essay. You could talk about the strongest pieces of material that connect to your thesis, the strongest information from the video, the strongest information from the text, the strongest images that you have and saw and felt and witnessed when you went to one of those nature areas in Oxford or on campus or close to campus for prompt 3. You can go with the most important, the ones that made the strongest impression on you, that you have the most to say, and then work your way down to the lesser important ones. There's a problem solution method where you establish a problem in the introduction, then offer a few solutions. If you're doing prompt 1, this might work well for you. There's not really a problem in terms of Conor sort of taking the phraseology and changing it to take the memories but leave only the footprints. But, you would look at, the fact that he did change the language and he changed it for this reason, and here's why. Here's why he did that. The problem isn't necessarily a problem, but he changed the language for the book to help him write and reflect upon that. And here's what the outcome was from that change based on what you read. And then something else you may be familiar with, comparison contrast. We compare and contrast things all the time, books and movies. We compare and contrast articles about celebrities with video evidence about celebrities. We do this all the time. We compare and contrast everything. We compare and contrast hamburgers at Oxford Burger Company with the hamburgers that are available at Five Guys. I mean, you name it, we compare and contrast it all the time. So that's another way you can write a synthesis. But I just want to show you quickly one way that you can come up with an organizational plan for this particular essay. And this is how I would do it. You can certainly do this or modify this in any way or do something totally different. But this is based on me, based on my writing process. I'm going to pull my camera and computer a little closer to me here so that I can type as we go. So this is how I approach really any writing task. And I'm doing sort of an outline, I'm doing sort of the organizational plan for this. I tend to set up an organizational plan like I take notes. When I'm in a lecture, I'm in a meeting, I'm doing something where I need to write down information, I'm a headings and lists kind of note taker. That just works well for me. When I go back to refer and kind of recap or try to remember what we talked about in that meeting or in that lecture or that presentation. I've got the headings, which kind of focus on the main ideas, and then the supporting points that deal with that. So let's say that this is my draft, and I've chosen prompt 3. So if you remember prompt 3, I asked you to go to one of the places in Oxford, the trails by the rec center, South Campus Rec Center, the trails that are there, and spend some time there. I mentioned Lamar Park. I mentioned some other places in town you can go to kind of experience what Conor Knighton experienced. So I'm going to choose that just for the sake of this particular discussion as my prompt. And so I've decided where I'm going is Lamar Park. Okay. So what I'm first thing is I'm going to do is I'm going to go, as I suggest in the prompt, and I'm going to go spend some time in Lamar Park. I'm going to go think about and spend some time there, walk around, get a sense of what's going on, who's there, what does it look like, what does it smell like, what does it feel like, all of those experiences. And so let's just say, for example, that the big 3 things that I remember from my trip is Lake Patsy, the walking paths, and the trees. Okay. So I spent about a half hour there. Maybe I walked around. Maybe I took some friends with me. We walked all over the park at Lamar Park. Here are the 3 things that I spent the most time looking at, thinking about, paying attention to: Lake Patsy, the walking paths, and the trails. So these are my headings. Now, depending on what I want to do, these might actually be body paragraphs for my essay. Now, I can change this later, probably will, but at least for right now, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to write about my experience going to Lamar Park, and I'm going to emphasize, just like Conor Knighton did when he went to his parks in the chapters that I read, how he emphasized certain things. He couldn't write about everything in the park, but he emphasized a few things. So I'm going to write about Lake Patsy. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to just jot down a few impressions that I had from Lake Patsy. And I'm going to write about how the light shines. I can take the light shines off the water. How nice that was. I'm going to write about the laughter and screams of children playing by the water. Because again, I remember this from my experience going over there. And then I'm going to write about the ducks that I saw swimming. Okay. Now, the walking paths. I'm going to write about this. So, what did I remember? What struck out to me? What stood out to me is how wide they were, and how many people could walk at one time. If you've been to some parks or been on some other walking paths or paths or trails, you know that's not always the case. I'm going to talk about how they curved and were steep and sloped in certain areas. So if you go to Lamar Park, one of the things that you'll notice is that the paths kind of move in a figure 8. They rise up, they go down. So if you walk on the outer exterior of the walking path there at Lamar Park, you get a pretty good workout. If you're looking to get some exercise or to condition yourself for whatever reason, you're able to do that. And then the third thing I'm going to mention is that there are 2 options. There's a short path, long path, and that people of all ages were using it. In fact, maybe I'll make that my 4th point. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for now, for the interest of time. I don't want this video lecture to be 45 minutes, but this is how I'm approaching my organizational plan. And again, this is how I take notes when I'm in meetings. This is how I come up with a draft outline or organizational plan for anything that I'm writing. And some of this comes from the fact that I'm a fiction writer. And so when I'm writing short stories and novels, I kind of follow this plan. When I'm coming up with characters or a plot for a story or a plot for a novel, I do the same thing. And you can do the same thing for trees. And so then what I'm going to do is after I've kind of got these basic points, so I've decided maybe that I'm going to have a paragraph about Lake Patsy and write about it and write it in the manner that Conor Knighton did. I'm going to have a paragraph about walking paths and a paragraph about trees. What I've got listed here is my impressions. These are the things that stood out to me when I was at Lamar Park. And these are the things that I remember. These are things maybe I took pictures of. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to find information that deals with some of these points because that's what the prompt asks you to do. So I might find out how much water is in the lake. How deep is the lake? Are there fish in the lake? One of the things that you'll see sometimes when you go to Lamar Park is people fishing or trying to fish. And so I'm going to go see if I can find information from the Oxford Planning Commission, from the Army Corps of Engineers, from wherever I could, Oxford Eagle, from any source, credible source that gives me some detailed information that can support that. Then I'm going to say, let's say for the ducks I saw swimming, what type of ducks are there? Can you feed them? If so, how? One of the things that you'll see when you go to Lake Patsy is there are clear signs that explain what you can do with the ducks and what you can't do with the ducks, what you can feed them and what you can't, so on and so forth. And so let's say I continue to do this. I could do this with the walking paths and the trees, right? So then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start drafting some paragraphs about and some sentences about these issues based on the information that I have here. So I'm just going to write a couple of sentences here. Trip around Lake Patsy and Lamar Park was a beautiful and peaceful experience. First impression was how the sun glistened off the water like sunlight reflecting off of glass. Lake, 30 feet deep, was built, and I'm making some of this up, in 1996 by the city of Oxford to enhance the beauty of the park. Okay. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if the lake's 30 feet deep. I have no idea. I'm just sort of making this up as I go. But you see what I've done here now. And I'm going to do this for the laughter of the kids on the water, the ducks I saw swimming. And what I'm doing is I'm going from the impressions that I had, Lake Patsy, walking paths, and the trees, to the impressions that I remember and that stood out to me, light shining off the water, laughter and screams of kids playing in the water, and the ducks I saw swimming, to the information that I went and found about this particular park or this particular element of the park, in this case, Lake Patsy. And I'm going to cite that information. According to the City of Oxford website or whatever. Just making that up too. I don't know if there's any information. I'm going to cite that information. And what I'm doing is I'm building sentences and building ideas that are going to eventually be the paragraphs of the essay. Okay? So that is one organizational plan that you can use to think about coming up with a way to develop this essay. You can use this for the other prompts as well. But again, I do it this way because I'm a headings, as I mentioned, a headings and lists kind of note taker. And then after I've sort of spent some time doing this, now I'm going to go back as I did here and start taking some of those ideas and formulating paragraphs based on that. So I'm going to stop right there. And again, I don't want this to be 45 minutes long of a video lecture. But I just wanted to kind of walk you through a method or a strategy or some tips or some considerations that you can apply to all three of those prompts as it relates to coming up with the beginnings of some paragraphs for this particular essay, particularly if you're going to be synthesizing information from a couple of sources. So you're going to be synthesizing information from the film clips and from Conor's work, from different chapters of the book, from your experiences at a place like Lamar Park and what information is about that particular park in terms of where things come from, how things were put together, whatever it may be. So I hope that's helpful to you. I hope that kind of gives you just a strategy, and you can adopt that, change that, modify that to any way that you think are right. But I think that will put you on a path to being able to come up with what will hopefully be some good body paragraphs for the essay. So if you want to talk about that more, I'm happy to do that. If you've got a different strategy or you run into trouble, as I mentioned with the video lecture on the assignment sheet, let me know. I'm happy to talk to you about it. I'm happy to work through. If you just want to bounce some ideas off of someone, or you want me to look at an outline, or any steps along the way, I'm happy to do that. Remember, you can also schedule an appointment with a Writing Center tutor for 10 extra credit points if you'd like some feedback on what you're doing that way as well. So I hope that was helpful. Just some things to keep in mind if you're doing synthesis work, both for this essay and the future. If you have questions or concerns about Essay 2, please let me know. I hope you have a good week. Good luck with the essay, and let me know if I can be of more help.